Welcome to FieldLink. I'm your host, Bill Smith. Every other week, we sit down with thought leaders from the agriculture industry that are committed to feeding, clothing, and fueling this country. We will talk to agronomists, market analysts, researchers, and growers about the latest products and technology. Joining us on this episode, we will visit with two Helena area managers from the wheat belt to get a good handle on how the 22 crop is looking. Plus, we'll catch up with Jody Lawrence for a commodity market update. And finally, we'll sit down with Jeff Gerhard, a range and pasture expert from Texas. Jeff will share how AGRI-Intelligence is impacting how ranchers in the Southwest United States are utilizing this technology to meet the demands for the beef industry. One of the most recognized crops in the world is wheat. It actually ranks number 3 in the United States. With the global demand, drought issues in much of Europe, and not to mention the ongoing conflicts in the Ukraine and Russia, wheat will continue to be in demand for 22. In this episode of FieldLink, we're going to visit with two Helena area managers from wheat country. Joining us today is Jake Adler, area manager for Helena, who is responsible for sales activities in Colorado, western Kansas, and Nebraska. And another Jake Godfrey, joins us from Big Sky Country in Montana, where he manages Montana, eastern North, and South Dakotas. Combined, these two gentlemen manage a significant portion of the wheat crop across the United States for Helena. Guys, welcome to FieldLink.
Thank you.
All right. We're going to jump right into it here real quick. Jake Adler. Jake joins us from Colorado. Jake, before we dive into talking a little bit about wheat and digging into that a little bit more, why don't you share a little bit about your background and how you made it to the area manager position at Helena?
Sure. Thanks, Bill. Thanks for having me on today. So I live in a small town called Holyoke, Colorado, which is extreme northeast Colorado. I've lived there since about 2008. And prior to that, I grew up just 40 miles east of there in southwest Nebraska. So spent the majority of my career and lifetime in that area. I've been with Helena for be 5 years in December. We came over as an acquisition. We were a smaller independent retailer there in northeast Colorado, and we were a Helena customer for a lot of years. And so when our owner decided to sell the business, it was a very natural fit to sell to a company like Helena. They've just done a really good job at taking care of our customers and taking care of our employees. So it was a natural fit. So I started with Helena as a branch manager and worked in that role for 2 years, and then got the opportunity to become area manager and work over a broader area, which I really enjoy. Just more diverse cropping practices, got to work with more great Helena people and growers. So real thankful to be working in this role today.
Well, we're excited to have you join us here today, Jake Adler. And also joining us, as I mentioned, from Montana, Jake Godfrey, our other Jake, who's covering a big portion of wheat country up in Montana, as well as eastern North Dakota and western North Dakota and western South Dakota. Jake, welcome to FieldLink.
Thank you, Bill.
Tell us a little bit about your journey. How did you end up to become the area manager for that geography up in the northern part of the country?
So I've been with Helena for just over 20 years now, and I started as a sales rep and did that for a couple of years, and then managed a wholesale branch in western North Dakota and eastern Montana. I had 3 locations: Sidney, Montana, Dickinson, North Dakota, and Rugby, North Dakota. And about 10 or 11 years ago, they asked me if I would take on a bigger role and just we started to acquire some more retail business, and we needed to add an area manager. And so I just stepped into that role at that point.
Awesome. Well, great to have you joining us here today, Jake. And really, guys, when I step back and look at, the overall acres that you cover, you guys are responsible for a big portion of the wheat country. That's really responsible for producing a whole lot of wheat for our nation and really for around the world. Jake Adler, covering the Kansas as well as the western Nebraska and Colorado. Let's size it up. How's the crop looking right now in your geography?
Yeah, Bill. So the majority of the wheat that's grown in our area is dry land. We do have some that's irrigated under center pivot irrigation, but 80 or 90% of the acres that we service are all dry land. And if anybody's been following the national weather patterns here over this past growing season for winter wheat, we started out really, really, really dry in July and barely got enough moisture to get the wheat crop up this fall, and then had an open winter with not a lot of precipitation. And so our wheat crop looks pretty tough. The last 2 years we've had, what I wouldn't consider record yields, but really good yields of, 60 to 80 bushel dry land, hard red winter wheat. And this year, I think 60 bushel is going to be the top end, and we're going to see a lot of 20 and 30 bushel wheat. And that changes over my geography. Probably the southernmost area that I cover would be Garden City and South. That's probably the toughest. A lot of that wheat has been, released to insurance and planted to other crops. You move up north to Scott City, Leota. Things look decent there. Goodland, Weskin. We've got kind of a halfway good crop there. And then really when you get into Colorado and up into southeast Wyoming, that's probably where we're going to see our best wheat this year, but definitely off of where we've been the last 2 years.
So a little further north you get in your geography, quite honestly, the better it gets.
Yeah, we just had a little bit, and it comes down to 2 or 3 moisture events more that we had this year in that geography. So not a lot, we're praying for rain for our summer crops. No doubt, as it's still very dry today, but it's thank God that we've got some good prices this year to help these guys out and generate some revenue. So even though it may be a 20 or 30 bushel crop, it's still been really important to take care of that because there's still some opportunity there.
Yeah, definitely a lot of opportunity. Wheat having a huge rally yesterday, breaking some records there. So definitely going in the right direction for some of these lower yields. Jake Godfrey, up in Montana and the Dakotas, how are things looking in your geography?
So we got a kind of a tale of a couple cities in that deal. So the Dakotas went into the spring horribly dry and have caught a lot of moisture. So, I mean, we're still just getting all the spring crop in. The northern triangle of Montana is horribly dry still. Like our winter wheat crop some of it be zeroed out from an insurance perspective. It just isn't going to amount to anything, but we're starting to catch some rains now. So the spring crop has a chance, but everybody's taking a little better care of the crop just due to the high price of wheat right now. And so even if they're not expecting a bumper yield, they're going to maximize as much as they can.
Yeah, still some opportunity up in that northern country with spring wheat going in the ground and taking advantage of some of these high prices that Jake talked a little bit about. Jake, what are some practices that you saw, Jake Adler rather, what are some of the practices that you saw some of your growers implementing this year to really try to maximize their yield as best as possible, understanding, the constraints with moisture, but to really maximize their yields? What are some things that you guys implemented across your market?
Well, in our area over the past few years, we've moved a lot of our spring applications into a 2-pass system. So rather than going out and just doing a straight weed and feed in the spring, we split up that fertilizer and that herbicide application. So we'll go out in February or March and run some UAN 32 or some 28005, and then we'll add typically some Coron and some Megafol to that application, which will help speed up green up, which is a big thing for quality in our area. The faster we can get the crop to green up, the more time that it has before it starts to senesce when it gets really hot. And we typically tend to add some protein and some test weight to our wheat when we do that. So a lot of 2-pass application there. On the second pass, when we go out and we have our herbicide application, we do a little bit lower rate of nitrogen, but we still have Coron in the tank there. Sometimes we do have a fungicide in there, which would be like a Veris or Full Scale, something like that, which will help mitigate stress for that early season time and hopefully get us to, where we've got a decent crop there at Flagleaf.
Okay, Jake Godfrey, tell us a little bit about some of the things that I guess your team's implementing to help their producers produce a more profitable wheat crop for the 22 season.
So in the last couple of years, we've really made a hard push on our Agri-Intelligence platform. We've invested in people and equipment to to get this done. We've EC'd a lot of acres in all throughout the Dakotas and Montana, Wyoming. That's I mean just variable rate and putting the fertilizer where it needs to be. I think is one of the main deals that we're really focused on to try to help our guys to do the best job they can do in raising a crop.
Yeah, I think that's a really important piece. I think the general trends historically have been, that precision, that big data, that agri-intelligence space. That's really great for those corn guys. But as wheat producers, maybe not focused on that. But it sounds like you putting a stronger focus in that area could have some higher payoffs for some of those growers.
Absolutely, and I think it's probably I don't not to take anything away from the corn and bean market, but it's probably more justifiable in these big wheat fields. It's poorer ground, so it varies more. So it's just it fits that deal. It's a little hard sell at first, but once they get going on it, they prove it to themselves almost every time.
Yeah, the visual perspective, but also running through the combine at the end of the year, really taking a lot of that variability out can be big. Jake Adler, are you seeing an uptick in that space for your geography for wheat growers?
Yeah, agri-intelligence in the West is definitely becoming a big part of what we do in all crops. And where we're using it in winter wheat production is, it's something, we're not doing anything as far as variable rate seeding at this point. But like Jake Godfrey said, I mean, whether it comes to using it for those variable rate fertilizer applications or maybe more so, between taking extractor samples early in the spring and then looking at our grid soil sample data in the fall, it helps you build a report card. And Agri-Intelligence has really helped us identify what some of those hidden hungers are on a field by field basis. It's really easy for a sales rep or a grower to get wrapped up in just NPK and what am I doing there? And there comes to be so many other aspects that have a big impact on yield and quality, especially in a crop that is under a lot of stress throughout season in a dryland market in our area. Sometimes an application of copper or some other micronutrient can make a really big difference. And, without agri-intelligence, we're just not getting the data to make those decisions. So it's made us smarter, better, and increase the returns for our growers and help manage that risk.
Jake, you said something that caught my ear, the hidden hunger. And I think that's very true really for all crops, but especially wheat, where, historically we've just kind of treated it as, hey, let's get it out there, see what happens in dry land, that is. But boy, what a small, if we can identify that hunger, that nutritional need in season and make that adaptation, with a product that, can turn that thing around, boy, we can really impact some yields.
Yeah, and it isn't always just a micronutrient that you find out. Typically in the fall we're out and we're applying an NPK zinc mix, and a lot of ours goes on through the dry air seeders in the fall,
Mm-hmm.
and guys typically they have a rate determined that they want to use for an entire field, or they have a rate determined for a zone. But you know what? Depending on how much snowfall and rainfall we get over the winter and the way the crop looks and the kind of yield goal you have going into spring, when we go back out and take those extractor samples, a lot of fields in my areas, we find out that we're still low on phosphorus, even though we've made that fall application. And, we've got some HPG products that we can come back in there, whether it be at fungicide timing with the plane or, at nitrogen timing in the spring, where we can put some additional phosphorus on that crop because it's just so important to building yield and quality in hard red winter wheat in our area. So it's not always a micronutrients. A lot of times it's a flexibility to do something later with the nutrients you've already applied, and maybe you just didn't get enough on for the kind of conditions you have that season.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And Jake Godfrey, I know your team up there has really implemented some high ground pieces with Agri-Intelligence to better identify what's in the soil. And I think you had some pretty success with a newer product called Research in your market.
Absolutely. It's a, I mean, a lot of the branches that are in this market are heavily weighted towards dry fertilizer, and that's their, I mean, it's transitioning to a little bit more liquid, but I mean, there's not a lot of value to add sometimes when you're just a dry fertilizer market and you're competing with 30,000 ton sheds in your area. I mean, urea is urea and MAP's MAP, DAP's DAP, potash is potash. But when you can add a dry component that's unique, user friendly, and adds yield, adds quality, like research. I mean, we got customers that are probably weren't traditional customers, but are coming to us just to get their research and then turn it into other business as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We're continuing to see growers up in that geography really adopted research, and really quite growers across the U.S. in that area to help maximize the efficiency for their fertilizer investment. Guys, as we kind of get going here, your combines are going to be rolling. Jake, there sounds like they're getting really, really close down in Kansas to cranking up. What are some tips that you can, I guess, set the stage for wrapping this season up in your market, but really setting the stage for next season for that winter wheat market in Kansas and Colorado and western Nebraska?
Yeah, I mean, we'll probably start harvest, at the end of June here in the southern part of my area, and then the rest of the area will be rolling usually between the 4th of July and the 10th of July. And this year we're going to be wrapped up earlier than usual. So there's not a lot left that we can do for the crop this year, but a lot of it is setting the stage for next year. And I do believe that wheat acres in my area will be up considerably this year, just because the amount of, acres that were released for insurance or that were just fallowed because it was dry. And I think with the price where it's at today, you're going to see folks, if we get some fall moisture, they're going to want to plant wheat again this season, because it is a very, hardy and stress resistant crop for our area. So it really comes down to getting out there, taking some good soil tests this fall, looking back at the extractor or tissue samples that we took this spring, build that report card, and start looking at, okay, what's the best possible program we can put on the acre this fall to give that crop the most yield potential there for 2023. And so, Jake Godfrey talked about a product research, and so we use that on a lot of our acres as well with that fall fertilizer application. And I think folks started to take a look at this year, what are some of the ways we can use Helena technologies to stretch that commodity fertilizer we're putting on our acres today, because they were so expensive. And so I think that trend is going to continue to be very important next year. And so just utilizing those options to, whether it be reduce volatility or increase fertilizer efficiency. And we've just got a lot of different things we can do there depending on the acre. But we really need growers to sit down with our sales reps and make good decisions there to set them up for a good 2023 season.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And every farm's a little bit different. Every operation's different, but having that connection back to your sales rep to help utilize these tools that are in place to help them produce a more profitable wheat crop is always vital. Jake Godfrey, things are really kicking in up north. The story's a little different. You still have a lot of opportunity ahead of you in your market.
We sure do. And we'll start, our herbicide season's just happening. So we're just starting to get a bunch of that done. And then, like I mentioned earlier, we left plenty of room for some added nitrogen. So we'll start putting our Coron on and or some of they'll stream on 32, but a lot of it'll be Coron with the herbicide or Coron all by itself with the airplane or with the ground rig. And just some micros for the hidden hunger that Jake Adler was talking about. We'll work off of our extractor samples and some just shotgun approaches. Some guys will just go out with, they're just like ENC, and they'll just, regardless of their sample, they'll go out with an application of ENC with their Coron. So we have a lot of opportunity left. We're just wrapping up seeding. Winter wheat's pretty sketchy in the big winter wheat country of the triangle, but there's, in the southern part of Montana, there's a great looking winter wheat crop, and it's just it's just flag leafing now. So it's time for fungicides and Coron on that as well.
Wow. Well, definitely a lot of opportunities out there for wheat growers this year to take advantage of, even on the market side. The market looks pretty solid right now. There's certainly a global shortage in wheat across the world right now. Things are tied up in Ukraine. We continue to hear stories coming out of that geography. The long story short, the supply demand is huge for wheat growers this year. A lot of opportunities as we wrap this season up and really set the stage for the 23 crop are certainly ahead of us. Guys, I definitely want to take this opportunity to thank both of you, Jake Adler from Colorado and Jake Godfrey from Montana. Guys, thank you for joining us on FieldLink.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Bill.
And joining me from Nashville, Tennessee is Jody Lawrence with Strategic Advisors. Jody, lots of stuff going on in the markets today right now. Our episode here is focused on wheat. What's going on in the wheat market as growers across the Midwest start to crank up combines and do some harvesting, especially in that Kansas market?
Well, the biggest thing has obviously been the 3-month issue with Ukraine and Russia. And will there be wheat exports? Will there not? Is it all going to be by rail? Is Turkey going to figure out a way to get both sides together, which seems highly unlikely because Ukraine wasn't even invited to the most recent meeting. So I think it's kind of hard to get an agreement between two people when one of them isn't there and is unwilling to make any agreement with somebody that's destroying their country. So you start out with what may or may not be grown and come out of Ukraine this year. I think we're starting to see, and certainly price action in the wheat market has indicated that you are starting to see some leaks out of Russia and whether in a couple different things, both their wheat exports and also their energy exports, that China, India, Japan, neighboring countries who may or may, they're either allies or frenemies, are being forced into a position because of all the mess across the world post-COVID on logistics that Russia is actually getting much more supply than what the world would think because of all the economic sanctions around the invasion. So it's challenging, to say the least, to see, to try to pick a direction for wheat. The wheat seasonal harvest pressure is in the market right now, and we're bumping around down at kind of the lower level of where we've been for the past, this is about the lowest level down here at 1050 against the July futures since, I'm looking at a chart here, since the March acreage report, March 31st. So
okay,
we're bumping down here, and wheat could very easily go $1 in either direction, because if Russia came out today and said they are working towards a ceasefire, or then that would certainly make the world think that the Ukraine wheat of a normal production year, 60 million metric tons, which is roughly 2.4 billion bushels, whatever percentage of that would be coming back into the market. So a lot of uncertainty, real slippery slope, but Russia certainly doesn't appear to have any interest in pulling back on their offensive. And that just creates, more uncertainty and just a really, really fragile and nervous wheat market.
Ukraine and Russia certainly impacting a lot of these, supply challenges right now and disrupting the market. There's a lot of other factors happening too. We take a look at some of the weather patterns throughout the Midwest. A couple of our guests talked a lot about that in southern Kansas, Oklahoma, the Texas, that market having some limitations on some supplies. And Even Europe, the rest of Western Europe, having some challenges with weather right now. The heat's really cranking up over there, and I'm hearing some reports. Are you picking some of that up, Jody?
Absolutely, because La Nina is settling in for kind of an unprecedented back end. It's usually a 12 to 18 month scenario when it does develop to a strong one like we've had, and we're coming on. Depending on which reading you look at, either a year or potentially, a year and a half to potentially 2.5 years, and you got, and Mother Nature is winning because you are getting record heat across the western U.S., the southern plains, moving into the Midwest over the next 10 days. Europe is in a drought and record heat. India has had their challenges on their production this year. Australia is really the only crop, and theirs was so bad last year that it's kind of an apples and oranges, but they are have bounced back considerably. So you do have one that which is good for the rest of the world, because I think in the U.S. you think, oh well, we're just talking about bread, but wheat is the staple for a majority of the underdeveloped world, North Africa. Just so many places that a world wheat shortage would be catastrophic. And when you look at the U.S. wheat conditions as harvest gets rolling along, 31% in yesterday's, that's historically low. Talked to two friends of mine out in western Kansas, 110 heat index with 40 mile an hour wind. I don't know who's harvesting or what that's helping, but it certainly can't be helping anybody's wheat. And just a combination of La Nina really getting a grip on growing conditions across the country and across the world. And if you just have to have a real high level of concern. But when we talk about weather, you always look at 4th of July. That always seems to be a big inflection point, and we've got some brutal heat and dryness, with some some small chances, but spotty pop up in the Corn Belt. But if we, one way or the other, especially with the 4th of July being another 3-day weekend on top of this weekend, you get a lot of market uncertainty. You've got the opportunity over the course of 72 hours to have some major, both bullish or bearish weather forecast changes for the U.S. Corn Belt that go into when you start early pollination after the 4th. So the next 3 weeks will really be incredibly volatile. And if you remember what happened last year, leading into the 4th, the weather looked bad. Forecast changed a little, then we had an absolute avalanche of prices following the 4th of July break. So expect volatility on all of it. And when you add wheat into the situation about what's going on in Ukraine, if there's a positive development, don't be surprised, as painful as it may be. You could see wheat move $1 in either direction. And if you are following your hedge program and moving along and you sell some here, you're either going to look like a genius or you're going to kick yourself for being $1 short. But that's just the nature of risk management, that at some point you have to go, gosh, I can sell 10.50 wheat, and I don't. There've been a lot of times when I started in the business, if wheat got to $5, it was a sell signal. So just a lot of things going on that when you talk wheat in particular. And wheat, if we have a U.S. problem on corn, wheat will certainly be the beneficiary of that. And conversely, if the weather turns good or turns less threatening in the U.S., corn will drag down wheat. So just a lot of insane volatility.
A lot of variability going on right now, certainly in that wheat market, especially, and a lot of things out of everyone's control when we talk about geopolitics and, of course, Mother Nature, a lot of factors impacting that. Speaking of volatility, Jody, boy, there's probably nothing more volatile right now than the energy market. Tell us about the fuel and crude oil right now. Boy, we got some records happening there.
Watching the crude oil trade this morning, and it's up another $2.60 a barrel. You got diesel up 17 cents, both of them making new contract highs, and it seems counterintuitive when you talk about what has happened lately with all the recession talk and the Federal Reserve potentially coming in tomorrow and raising prime by 0.75 of a point, which would be would be unprecedented in most everybody's life that's listening to this podcast. And that crude oil would still be driving higher, and that tells you just the amount of energy that's being used around the world, despite the fact that the world equity markets are now in a bear market position, having dropped 2,000 points since their highs earlier this year. But unfortunately, energy prices keep surging. And when you look at July diesel contract, which is the spot contract, obviously there's some taxes and some other additions on here when you talk to your supplier, but at $4.44 a gallon, just as a base price for diesel, that certainly is cutting into both families trying to get to work and get kids to summer camp and what they're doing this year. Plus, you look at all the fuel needs that the American farmer and the world farmer is going to need over the course of the next 6 months. So that to me is the biggest concern, but it's always crude oil and energy have always added support for the rest of the raw material. So even with some dips like we're getting, if you see crude and diesel making new contract highs and making new, 14-year highs, I guess, that our stuff is going to be well supported because ethanol is the only thing you can blend in gas to bring the cost down. And the biodiesel push, you've got so many plants coming online coming up that the surge in soy oil use for biodiesel is going to be enormous and going to be very, very hard if the U.S. continues in this weather pattern to try to keep all those demand balls in the air in this juggling act that we're having to do right now.
Well, there certainly is a huge demand for energy. And, Jody, the average consumer, they cannot just walk up to the refrigerator, open the door, and look inside of it. And everything that you see and touch and feel inside the refrigerator has been moved or developed or brought to the marketplace by diesel. So managing this diesel, this diesel volume, this diesel price is going to be absolutely critical for the economy.
Yeah, you look at it. We got our garbage pickup service. They added on a $25 surcharge per month, which I completely embrace because I understand it. But you just look at the additional pain that goes through every one of them because it costs money to get everything where it needs to go, for sure.
Well, and in some recent reports, my daughter's actually in supply chain logistics, and she was indicating to me that, a lot of independent truckers are really faced with some very difficult decisions, when they're starting to fill their tanks up. Can they really afford to run that truck down the road with today's diesel prices? And you start to remove 15, 20% of the semis that are going down, the interstate, boy, that's going to put an impact on, the entire supply chain.
Yeah, you have diesel prices $3 higher than they were. Granted, COVID gives you kind of a inaccurate
bubble
measuring stick in this, but if you just go back to average of thinking a gallon of gas and a gallon of diesel, and for a long, long time, remember when diesel was 25, 30 cents cheaper than unleaded gas. And that was the whole driving point of diesel, that they could use less refinery capacity and less cost to produce it, but not the case now. When you start doubling the cost of what it takes to get everything everywhere and everything done, there's a pinch, and sympathetic with everybody because I got a Suburban and we had to do some summer running around, and I didn't even look. I just waited till it was filled up, didn't even look how much I spent, and just got in and drove away. So challenging times for everybody, to say the least.
So, Jody, with what we know today, I mean, what's some, I guess, base advice for growers as they're, kind of turning the wheels here, or starting to slow down rather. Things are in the ground. We're approaching that mid-June, July timeframe. Harvest is not that far off. What do they need to be thinking about from a marketing standpoint?
Well, from wheat right now, it's just going to be get comfortable with how much you've sold, because as harvest pressure mounts and the wheels turn over all the spring wheat, you just have to embrace the fact there's going to be an enormous amount of volatility in the market, and that you just have to be comfortable in whatever decision you make at noon on Tuesday the 14th. You're comfortable with that, with all the information at hand, knowing full well that 15 minutes later you may look like a genius or be a little bit chagrined about it. And then corn and beans, I think you just have to watch the weather, because, gosh, as much as I hate to say this, because what we all know is that $7 corn and $17 beans are not healthy for the entire farm economy, all the way down to ranchers and anybody in the livestock business. That there just isn't a lot of downside here, because if we have a weather problem and national corn yield, prevent plant goes up another 1 million acres of corn, that takes 175 million out of production. Then all of a sudden you lose 2 or 3 bushels an acre on the 88 million. Next thing you know, we've lost 400 to 500 million acres. And the craziest thing is that yield at 173, 174 would still be a top 10 national all-time yield. And if it goes any lower than that, you could really put in a position where we could be talking about $8.50 to $9 December corn. And the only thing, what I'm telling every one of my customers, and we're certainly not trying to push anybody to be uncomfortable in trading options or futures, but there are vehicles that you can make cash sales now. You can be comfortable because the crop's in the ground and growing, that you can make a great sale right here. But what you have to remember is that if corn does run to $9, you can, what that $9 corn is going to affect the price most of is next year's input costs, your landlord raising rent, what you're paying at auction for ground, what the potashes and CFs of the world charge for all your fertilizer products. So you have to be really, really careful that you just don't look at it and go, okay, I'm making money this year, because if we have a 173 yield, we very easily could be talking about real challenges for the entire industry, the biggest we've seen in decades, if not maybe a lifetime. So you have to be cognizant of that and just pay attention that there is upside, but you want to be responsible about it. So anybody's welcome to call us, particular to talk it through, because we're in the education business on these trading accounts. But just know and buckle up for the volatility across all the markets.
Yeah, I think that's really important, Jody. You referenced 22. Hey, we got to ride. And it's going to a lot of volatility. We understand that. Embrace that. Try to get yourself in a good position, but keep your eye on the ball for 23. There's going to be a lot of things happening in 23, and try now to start putting yourself in the best spot for 23. Jody, what's a good phone number for folks to reach out to you?
615-948-2378 is my cell. And you can always catch me or leave a message there. Summer travel and everything else is, I'll be in and out of the office like everybody else,
sure,
trying to take care of things. But the email address, and I'll always get back to you. And they come to my phone also if I'm out of the office, is JB Lawrence, LAWRENCE, at Comcast.net. And Brady and I'll certainly get back with you as quickly as we can to answer any questions.
Well, thank you, Jody. And as always, you can reach out to your Helena representative to get Jody's daily newsletter to get signed up for that. So reach out to your Helena representative. Jody, thanks for joining us today from Nashville. We look forward to hearing from you next time.
Okay, Bill, thank you. Everybody be safe while you're harvesting that wheat.
For many livestock producers, pasture management can often take the back seat, especially for producers that farm and raise livestock. But for many ranchers across the nation, pasture management is key to their success. Good pasture management is vital for the overall health of the pasture and their bottom line. Today, joining us on FieldLink is Jeff Gerhard. Jeff is a range and pasture specialist from Texas. Jeff, welcome to FieldLink.
Good to talk to you.
Jeff, range and pasture, that's your wheelhouse. You specialize in, helping producers across, a good portion of Texas and New Mexico, Oklahoma, in that area, better manage their pasture and rangeland. Before we dive into that, but tell us a little bit about you. Where's home and how did you get into this area, Jeff?
Well, I grew up in Ohio, and I'm not from the farm or ranch. I grew up in the city, and I've always had an interest in agriculture because of the private school I went to over in eastern Ohio. They raised a herd of Jersey and Holstein cows, and I helped the local farmer dairyman on the weekend do the milking, and got involved that way with some of the farming operations. And when I got ready to graduate, my mom took me over to the OARDC, the research center over there, eastern Ohio, and I visited with some of the local doctors and researchers over there about opportunities in ag, and they said, you need to go to Ohio State. And so that's where I ended up going, and 4 years later, I got a degree in agronomy and moved west to Nebraska and got a job out there working for a local co-op, learning the ins and outs of the fertilizer and chemical elevator business, the grain handling and all that, and worked my way up to a retail fieldman and was calling on local farmers up in that area, primarily corn, grain, sorghum, soybeans. And of course, had opportunities to interact with the industry people as well that were calling on us, and went to work for a company that hired me, Ciba-Geigy, and was putting a territory up in the Sandhills in Nebraska, and 2 million acres of corn up there, 16 counties, and enjoyed it immensely, living in O'Neill. And anyway, made my way down to Texas as a promotion, and worked down here for a number of years with through the mergers with Novartis, and finally became Syngenta. And Helena was one of my largest customers, and they wanted to do a better job reaching the rancher audience that we have down here in Texas and Oklahoma and New Mexico. So they hired me for this position that I'm in currently, and that's what I've been doing the last 15 years, and really enjoying it.
Great. And Jeff, you live in the Fort Worth area, is that right?
Yes, sir. Yep, been living here since 97.
Okay, excellent.
Primarily West Texas, areas west of Fort Worth. I do a little bit in East Texas, but most of our operations are further west and out to the New Mexico line, and where my main area of operation is.
Well, definitely ranch country and that geography. Can you tell us what are three big things that farmers and ranchers in that geography look to as it relates to managing their pastures and rangeland, and why do they need to focus in that area?
Well, if you've got the land, you need to manage what you've got in front of you to be able to sustain a profitable cow herd. And if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So the first thing is having a good knowledge of what your actual rangeland productivity is in a normal year, a wet year, a dry year, and that will be allow you to set appropriate stocking rates so that you don't undermine the resource that you're utilizing, which is usable forage that we've been blessed with here in Texas and elsewhere, and to set appropriate stocking rates so that you don't hurt yourself going forward in a dry year like what we are right now.
You know, I think it's really interesting because we talk about stock rates and, better managing with what really, quite honestly, God gave us. And we talk about environmental compliance and some of these things, some of the best environmentalists really, or conservationists, are farmers and ranchers, especially when it comes to pasture. What are some tools that some of your customers have implemented in terms of better managing their pasture?
Well, the knowledge base that's available now versus even 10 or 15 years ago is so much greater because of the use of the internet and remote sensing and weather reports and weather forecasting and things like this nature. One of the things that I like to do on a new property that I've been asked by a landowner to come out and work with them on is I like to know before I go on that call where it's located, and then there's some resources available through the NRCS, the Natural Conservation Resource Center, that the web soil survey that you can pull up. Soil surveys have been done on all the land in Texas, and it gives you an indication of you put the boundaries of the property in question, load them in there, and it'll give you an indication as to what the forage production will be for that particular ranch and how many animal units you can run efficiently on that property. So that's one of the tools, just knowing where your best soil is and where your problem areas are as well. And, that gives you an indication of maybe some things you can do to ameliorate that and improve those areas, whether that be brush control or weed control or perhaps fertility if it's some type of grazing crop that they're raising.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because, clearly, this area of agri-intelligence and precision agriculture has been a key for a lot of, crop producers over the years. But we often don't hear about a lot of that technology translating over to the pasture and range side as much. But from what I'm hearing is you're implementing a lot of that technology into, some of these better practices for ranchers.
Yes, it's important anytime, I think, if you're making a decision as to a fertilizer application, especially on improved grasses such as Bermuda grass, coastal Bermuda grass. They grow a lot down here for hay or hay grazer or grazing wheat. We have a lot of wheat that is just used exclusively for grazing. If you're going to make a fertilizer application, more information is a beneficial thing, so that you're not hurting yourself, that you're helping yourself, that you're moving the needle in the right direction in terms of overall forage production. That's where the high ground soil testing service that we operate, landowners, has really helped me develop a better relationship with these customers and giving them a deeper insight into what their actual needs are and putting together a plan to accomplish their objectives, which is more usable forage for their cattle.
Jeff, have you got any success stories where you've actually worked with maybe some landowners and, were able to share some insight with them as it relates to high ground or other technologies, and what was their outcome?
Well, one of my largest customers last year has a property in Oklahoma that they run stocker cattle on. He's a large feedlot operator out of Kansas and brings, he's got, I think it's 3,000 acres or so of wheat that I've been after him for years. We've been pulling soil tests, just composite samples out there to give us a ballpark idea about what our needs were. And we knew we were low on potash, but we really didn't know what amounts we needed and where we needed it, because this is a highly variable place as far as the overall topography of the ranch. There's draws and hills and, sandy areas, there's clay areas. high ground identifies all those fields within the fields, allowing us to custom tailor a fertilizer recommendation to address the deficient areas and bring them up to where we need to be in terms of their overall fertility. The other thing that they did on this place is they've been putting lime out, and lime's very expensive. You don't need to apply it everywhere. What high ground does is identify those areas that you need it the most, and allows you with variable rate technology, application technology, with their spreader trucks to vary that rate as you're on the fly, as you're going through the field through the GPS. It's a wonderful thing, and you're putting the right amount out and really providing the landowner some benefits in terms of raising that pH and in the areas where it needs it the most.
Excellent. And did that grower see some increase in terms of more forage after going through that experience, or how does that relate back to, I guess, pounds on the cattle, pounds on the hoof?
Well, we know that when you've got an acid soil, that a lot of your nutrients are not as available, and some of these pH values were down in the low fives, where we're trying to adjust that pH to the neutral range, which is 6.5, where most of your phosphorus, which is expensive nutrient to buy right now, we're trying to get it back up to 6.5, where the phosphorus is most available. And we won't know for 3 years. We go back and resample 3 years from now those same georeference sites to see if we've moved the peg, and hopefully that's what we're going to see in 3 years. But the main benefit he received on that, running that program this last year, was that he didn't over apply and he didn't under apply. He put the correct amount he needed on every area that was limed, and that's huge.
Well, and to your point, when you balance that out and you increase that pH to where it needs to be, everything tends to work better. Even the herbicides, they tend to work a little bit better when they're in that right pH zone.
Yeah, one unique thing about this particular customer, he just recently sold out to another one of my customers from another area of Texas, and he was explaining to that new owner the mapping that we did out there and running the high ground. And this other rancher has a large property that he purchased elsewhere in Texas, and he decided he wants to run it on that whole farm down there as well. So it's really turned into a good thing for Helena, and it's a good thing for the customer. You're seeing the value of the program.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. Knowledge is power. We hear that a lot. And, when growers do make that investment into a high ground program, ranchers especially, it truly gives them more insight to what's, inside their ground. But it also increases the value because you have something in addition to, prove the value of that range pasture.
Yeah, it really it gives them a deeper insight into what their land actually has available and where they need to make improvements. And information that's basically what we're in, is the information selling business, working for Helena and helping those growers make good decisions that improve their bottom line is the ultimate goal, because we want them to be successful. If they're successful, Helena's going to be successful.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The grower's got to win, and in this case, in range of pasture, for most cases, that grower needs to put more, pounds on their livestock, and if we can help them through high ground as well as other technologies, whether it be a Helena product to better manage pasture, that sort of thing, weed control, that's certainly something we want to try to do. Jeff, what are some of the trends that you're picking up as far as better managing brush and other weeds across rangeland and pastures?
Well, that's a large part of what I do. Is when I get called by a landowner, it's either he's got a pasture he wants to spray for weeds or get put on the schedule for that, or he's wanting to do something about his mesquite problem, which is a large problem out here in Texas, or prickly pears, another large one we deal with a lot in my area. and or other brush species. It just depends on where you are in the state. And you know, that's one of the things that I spend a lot of time on is okay, you know, you got to have a budget, know what amount you're going to be willing to spend. And then one of the things we're using now to help the grower or the rancher make better decisions about where to apply those funds is we're doing remote monitoring through satellites of mesquite density overlaid with the soil test information that we have through the web soil survey, showing them their most productive range sites. Usually for mesquite, you're going to find that the heaviest densities are in those most productive range sites. So if you apply a practice there, you're going to get a way bigger return on investment on what you can run animal units per year by applying a well-timed herbicide application. The other thing that we're doing is this remote sensing allows us to tell them when it's inappropriate to spray, because that's just as important. That's probably even more beneficial in knowing when the appropriate time is to spray and when not to spray. So it's really helped me a lot in the last few years, because every year's different out here in Texas. It seems like last year we were wet, now we're dry.
It's really interesting to hear you talk about all of the information technology that's being implemented into ranching. I mean, I think for a lot of folks that are not involved in the ranching business, don't quite understand how that technology certainly does cross over into range and pasture management.
Yeah, it does. And, the other thing we're hearing more about now is drone usage by ranchers in using it to monitoring their security on the ranch, watering, checking watering, saving you having to go out and on a four-wheeler or a mule or your pickup and check things out. You can do it remotely through the use of a drone. So that's still in its infancy, but I expect to see more of that being utilized in the future as well.
Well, technology certainly is evolving in all of agriculture, but definitely has a strong play for, the folks that are in the livestock business and have, pretty big area to cover, especially in some rough terrain there in West Texas and other parts of the country, for that matter. Jeff, what's the tone right now for a lot of your customers? As we're taking a look at some of the livestock markets right now, where's their energy? Are they wanting to invest into their pasture management? Are they holding back? What's the temperature for many ranchers across the country that you're dealing with?
Overall, I'd say that there's still a lot of optimism out there. There's headwinds that we're facing, irregardless of what the year it is. It could be the weather, it could be water availability, drought, things like that. But these are things that ranchers are used to dealing with. It's nothing new.
Right. Yeah, I've been dealing with that for 200 years plus.
It's part of the job description. So, with the most of the ranchers that I deal with, they know they've got needs and they budget accordingly. It's part of their planning process that they sit down every year and they do a budget just like most businesses do. And they plan for their fertility costs. They budget for that. They budget for, seeding wheat for grazing. They brush control. They've got a budget for that. And they allocate the resources as they're available to accomplish their objectives and keep the ranch in the condition they need it to be in to be able to survive the hard times we know that come, and also be ahead of the game when things turn good. So puts them in a better position if they've got a good plan in place, that they operate for the plan and stick to it year to year.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's exciting when growers and ranchers have a plan and they stick to that plan and that strategy. It's often easy to get, kind of caught up in the whirlwind of the day in the moment. But especially when you're dealing with pastures. These pastures are going to be around a while, so managing them appropriately is really kind of important. It can be a lifetime or a generational change with some of the things, whether it's cross fencing or whatever the strategy may be. Managing your ranch is a little different than managing, some row crops in some situations.
Yeah, if you've got a plan, it really frees you up to not worry about those day-to-day things. You know that those are going to come. That there's going to be stumbling blocks that are going to be placed in your way. But but by having that plan, it helps you better weather those unforeseen circumstances, I think.
Yeah, Jeff, you deal with a lot of different products out there. What are some key things that you've recognized from the Helena products line that are really helping producers out better manage their pasture?
Well, we'll talk about the weed control options that we've got available to us with Helena. We've got a really good product development group that brings us brands that I think add value and offer some real needs that ranchers and growers and people with weed problems that they want to try and address. One of the main products that I sell in the spring of the year is Latigo Bold. It's a acid-based 2,4-D and dicamba product that's excellent on a lot of the weeds that we have here in Central and West Texas. One of the unique features of it, this acid technology, is it allows us to use the product in areas where perhaps we've got some sensitive crops that we need to be mindful of our neighbors, and we don't want to have any issues there. So it is not as volatile as some of your other 2,4-D and dicamba products, and seems to work better in those type of tricky environments and give us really good results on the weeds. The other products we use herbicide-wise, there's an acid triclopyr product that we manufacture called Tricera. It's triclopyr and used primarily for brush control. And I'm adding it, again, in those areas where I've got cotton that I've got to be concerned about, and I don't want to have any risk of injurious effect on the neighbor's crops, adding that into the mix to get better performance on our primarily woody brush species such as mesquite. Other products we've got Resurge and Hydrium. We use these in our fertilizer applications. It's our bioscience offerings that are used where we've got real high pH soils, pretty much a lot of parts of Texas, and your phosphorus gets tied up with a high pH. We're adding the Resurge into our dry fertilizer applications to help mitigate some of those issues with the soil to make the phosphorus more available, especially since phosphorus is more expensive and a lot of guys are wanting to reduce rates to stretch their dollars out. We can add some research to that fertilizer application and really provide the landowners some benefits there.
Oh, yeah. And then that's a good point. Having those kind of products into fertilizer, especially for, maybe not all the rangeland, but guys that are having more intense pastures, boy, what a great tool to be added to their fertility program.
Yeah, another one that I was just talking to one of my producers up in Oklahoma that, with the high cost of nitrogen, he's a Bermuda grass grower for hay production and for grazing for his cattle. And a lot of guys backed up on me this year, rightfully so, when they saw the price of liquid nitrogen. And, we're not saying that this is going to supplement or it's not going to displace proper nitrogen usage, but Coron Metra, I've had some guys run that with either their weed control spray that they're going across the field with anyway, putting a gallon or two of that out to try and foliar apply their nitrogen needs to give them a bump when we've got some good growing conditions too, when we've had a recent rainfall event. And I think that's probably helped somewhat this year as well.
Well, and you bring up a good point. A product like Coron Metra certainly has the ability to be flexible It's not the sole nitrogen plan for a lot of producers, nor should it probably be, but a great, build on, leaving a little room, feeding that crop, in this case, the pasture, or hay field when it's needed. And, hitting that nitrogen, we get that good rain, you can add a little in there and hopefully get some, benefits out of there for creating more forage.
Right.
Jeff, what are some of the hot topics in terms of range production that some of your growers are, looking for you for assistance right now as we kind of get into the middle of the season?
Right now, I'm waiting for the weather to be right so I can all these mesquite applications that I've got. I'm waiting on one of the things that we do that's part of this program that's offered by one of our suppliers is that it is actually monitoring the mesquite for me remotely. Every 3 days, it's taking a picture of that particular pasture that we've selected to make an application to, and it's telling me based on the imagery what the vigor of that particular tree looks like. So the application is basically the decisions being made by the satellite when it's right. And it's looking back in time over, prior seasons to know when we reach that peak and if we're going to reach it this year. And when that does occur, I've got to go out and physically make a ground check to see that it's time to spray before we pull the trigger on, getting the airplane or helicopter to come in there and make the application. So a lot of my time is spent this time of year just working with the landowners to make sure I've got their maps right, getting those to the applicator to include in their schedule of work to be done, and coordinating with the helicopter operators, getting product where it needs to be. So
it's definitely an exciting business that you're in, Jeff. Very unique, and I know that our listeners are really taking some good notes here. And it's interesting to sit back. As a guy that grew up in the livestock business up in Nebraska, I'm used to managing pastures, but boy, you're taking it to a whole different level when you're implementing these satellite images and implementing that kind of technology. And Jeff, we want to thank you for joining us here on FieldLink today.
Well, thank you, Bill. Enjoyed it.
All right. I appreciate it.
Eat more beef.
There we go. It's what's for dinner.
Yeah.
Hey, folks, thanks for joining us here on this episode of FieldLink. Be sure to subscribe to all of our podcasts on your favorite platform, as well as following us on helenaagra.com.